Friend, enemy, or frenemy? How do Indians view the rise of China and its implications for India's rise? Join the conversation on this important topic by taking the China Challenge survey. The survey has been put together by researchers at the Takshashila Institution. Answer our 10 simple questions and let your voice be heard in shaping India's policy towards China. For more details, log on to www.takshashila.org.in or you can click on the link and take the survey in the show notes. Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host, Jaison from the Takshashila Institution. As the Paris Olympics take center stage in our sporting calendar, I thought it would be interesting to have Sharda Ugra, one of India's well-renowned sports journalists, to talk about India's medal prospects, how the Indian government has funded athletes participating in the Paris Olympics, and whether promoting sporting culture should even be the objective of the government. We also talk about the role of CSR contributions and NGOs in promoting grassroots sports and the curious paradox of Haryana producing some of India's most accomplished women athletes. Sharda Ugra has been a sports journalist for over 3 decades. She started her career with Mumbai tabloid Midday before working with national daily The Hindu, India Today magazine, and ESPN Cricinfo.com, ESPN India. She has written and spoken about issues around Indian sport in conferences and publications at both home and abroad, and researched and reported on the role of ethnic minority cricket in England and Australia. She worked with former New Zealand captain John Wright on his book Indian Summers, which were his memoirs of his years coaching India, and with Yuvraj Singh on The Test of My Life, an account of his diagnosis and recovery from cancer. She was a fellow of the Australia-India Institute, University of Melbourne in 2013. She's based in Bangalore and is a columnist with the Hindustan Times, Delhi, and BBC's World Services Hindi website, and also contributes other publications. Listen in to our conversation. So, hi Shada, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Carl. I'm really happy to be here. Hope we can have some interesting conversations and I can talk a bit about Indian sports and have people listen to things that they don't really know about or pay attention to until the Olympics comes around.
That's right. Yeah, I think with the T20 World Cup fever now well behind us, it's fair to say that the Olympics is now taken center stage. It is an event that happens every 4 years, so there is a certain novelty to the event. So, if you can maybe tell us a little bit about India's Olympic preparations this time around, broadly, where does the Indian public, but also the Indian government see medal prospects, so to speak, and then we can take.
I think over the last, say, perhaps 2 Olympic cycles, you're talking maybe London, you could include it. So you're including London 2012, and because it followed the Commonwealth Games and Rio 16 and Tokyo, and then now. There has been certainly a greater increase and a greater sort of dynamic involvement of the central government in the Olympic preparation. So because the sports ministry's job in New Delhi is largely around elite athletes and the top, athletes representing the country. That's what the whole role is. So that has changed in these last, literally, I can tell you because I've watched it change in the last kind of 25 years. And so therefore, what we are seeing in Tokyo is almost a bunch of athletes that have gone in there along with, we have 117, but there would have been many more that were also part of this government program that was supporting them with monthly stipends, that was supporting them with chances to train abroad, to participate abroad, to give them the best possible preparation. So the government doesn't really talk about how much money is spent on these schemes and programs. What happens is that after, if the medals are a lot or less, after that, you hear conversations about how much money was spent on the athletes. I mean, and to be honest, to get an Olympic medal, money has to be spent to a very large degree. I think Britain did a survey just after the Olympics saying that they had spent something like £4 million per gold medal, or some really insane. You can find it
Oh,
on the internet.
right. Mm,
What it cost them to get their medals at the London Olympics. So that is the cost that's there. What are they hoping for? I think what happens is that the government identifies priority sports, sports
mm,
in which they think India will succeed, or which they have a track record. So that's
mm.
why you're seeing shooting, you see wrestling, boxing. You look at hockey as well. Hockey kind of falls in and off. We are
Yeah,
not talking about the team's performance for the first two matches.
yeah,
So those are the kind of sports that get a lot more attention, a lot more funding. Athletics has suddenly picked up in the last,
yeah.
say, maybe two cycles. You're looking.
Mm,
That's the main sports that are there. The faces and the names that you see are the faces and the names that people expect. Badminton, PV Sindhu's performances. You got Lakshya Sen and so that's the kind of the top flight sort of priority sports, as they call them. They divide them into three parts, and priority is the one that gets the most interested, which is a very sensible way of doing things rather than passing money around everywhere.
got it. Yeah, so to what Sharda said, I think the official figures, at least as far as the Sports Authority of India's Mission Olympic Cell has put out, is that the government has spent close to 470 crores across 16 disciplines. And as you mentioned, athletics has gotten a major chunk of this, somewhere close to 97 crores. In no small sort of thanks to
Yeah.
Neeraj Chopra's incredible feat in Tokyo. Um, so this is interesting. So now what I wanted to understand from you, Shada, is how has corporate social responsibility in sports, sort of picked up over the years? Now we know of organizations like Go Sports. So I've had Deepthi on the podcast previously um,
Yes.
speak about their efforts to promote athletes in the sporting ecosystem. So how do you see CSR money being effectively used to train and fund athlete development, performance, etc.?
Okay, so I'll just go back to my that the Carl, to the question that just before this. Thank you for
Hmm.
that figure. Then, but literally for every Olympic, for every medal that the Great Britain won at the London Olympics, they spent £4.5 million. Now, just
Ah,
divide
okay.
that into Indian money, and you can understand what it costs. So going back to the question about corporate social responsibility is a very interesting one, because we've seen this, to me, in my mind, has been the big game changer in how India has prepared for the Olympics, and how India's focus on the Olympics has turned to medal performances, and how when these organizations, so corporate social responsibility is looked at in a way that has made a big difference to all these kind of non-governmental organizations that have been created,
Hmm.
say around the time of 2006, 2005, if you go back and look, because India was winning just a medal per games kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And when these organizations came with they started, there was the Mittal Champions Trust, because Lakshmi Mittal said, I'm putting $10 million dollars or pounds into helping our athletes get better. So what these organizations did is, then they literally, this is a very Indian phenomenon that has been created, are these private non-governmental sports bodies. They are like the link agency between the government's
Hmm.
funds per se, and the athlete and federations. And all that these organizations were set up was because of the fact that the way the federation structures ran, they really were not very well aimed at supporting their athletes, never mind their best athletes. So these
Hmm.
organizations that came in, like for example, you have OGQ, which is now the oldest running, then you have the Jindal Sports, and
Yeah.
so they came in and they set up these agencies and said, let us become the people that speed up procedures. Like, say,
Hmm.
for example, an athlete needs money to get surgery done or to go and train somewhere. That
Hmm.
used to take so long for the athlete to go via his federation to the government and back, that
Hmm.
time had gone. So these agencies became these kind of, almost accelerators to say, we'll do this for you. And you started seeing medals almost immediately. And
Hmm.
I don't think we can deny the fact that Abhinav Bindra's medal and the medals that
Yeah.
followed came because there was this big push from these private bodies.
Right. Hmm.
What happened then at the same time is that, and at the same, and this corporate social responsibility, and you have to include sport, is a great thing. But who's going to put that money into sport, and where is that money going to go? And
Hmm.
NGOs or whatever. These
Mhm.
organizations said, we'll do it. We will channel this money. If you give it to us, this is how our money will go. Go Sports is they came on your program. Go
Perfect.
Sports has a very interesting role because it starts at a much, it's not an elite level as much as it starts at grassroots and juniors and so on. And they said, we'll do it. We'll be these organizations that will work. And now, what happened as well, I mean, and you will not get anyone saying this on record, but I am saying it because it has been said to me, is that a lot of people in the government, in the sports ministry, for example, they said, look, we are putting in 85% of the money. These guys are putting in like 15%, and all the credit goes to them when athletes win medals. This is ridiculous. It's almost like then that's why you had this Mission Olympic Cell and the TOPS program, and it became very openly about the government putting their money. I mean, the government has played a role from 1950s onwards, and I'll say this everywhere. Had it not been for government support by way of jobs that were offered in the railways, institutions like the banks and petroleum companies, airlines, Indian Airlines, for example, Olympic sport in India would be dead. There would be no Olympic sport in India. So the government's sort of expenditure on sport had stayed consistent. The only point was that these federations that ran these bodies, they are still, I believe, the weak spot in our sporting ecosystem. They're the gap, basically, because the government money is now there. And you would want more corporates to be able to come in and do this. And what happens is, because of the corporates that are there, they're just looking at cricket and headlines and all that stuff. I was in a very interesting meeting, as in that's where the money tends to go. But the CSR, to say the CSR money needs to be spent on grassroots sport more now, I believe, than on, say, elite sport, because elite sport is getting a large amount of funds. You've just read out the figure. When this law changed about the CSR being diverted towards sports, it made a big difference for all these organizations that were there on the ground at the time. OGQ, Go Sports, all the other ones, JSW. It made a difference to them. And look, then there are places and people where we can go and get this. We are also seeing for the first time over the last, let's say, the last 10 years, um, private money being put into set up huge, not huge, to set up institutions for training athletes, like the Inspire Institute of Sport that JSW set up, and the Reliance Foundation, which followed later. So these organizations are saying, we're going to take the load away from the government on doing this. We're going to do it ourselves. And of course, there will be some government funding that they will tap into. I mean, those details definitely do exist. But the bulk of the like I said, credit, or what it's a share of voice, is what my friend Joy Bhattacharya calls it.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the share of your voice in the soundtrack of Indian sports that is immediately increased. It's like without a doubt, it just becomes huge. Everybody knows about OGQ. Everybody knows about JSW. Everybody knows about the Reliance Foundation because these athletes come out and say this. But because of the TOPS and the Mission Olympic Cell and all these things being put up, you do have a greater acknowledgement of the government role in having these elite athletes supported. And what's being said these days now is Adil Sumariwala and Manisha Malhotra, who's with JSW as a scout and in its administration. They said that it's almost like the foreign coaches say that you're spoiling the athletes. They get everything they want, at the top. So you're having these conversations. They've just begun now. Because they're saying now you have to produce the medals, go up and show up. As Abhinav Bindra describes it, you have to go up there and you have to show up. You and your talent has to show. Yeah.
No, it's interesting, and apart from the funding that they receive for their training, they're also sent to foreign
Yes.
countries for exposure, for trips.
Yes.
Sort of to have them match up against the best in the world. And I think that's something that 20 years ago, often the Indian public would lament that we don't really get an opportunity to pit our athletes against the best in the world before you have a major event. So I think that's been going the right direction broadly.
That's a huge thing. What it also does, Carl, is that you're able to see that why say, for example, just take the example of Indian football. Why do you not see a lot of our footballers go and play overseas? Because the money that they get playing here in their own country is good enough for them to say, look, this is where I'm making a good, decent income. Let me do it here. You do not have the similar kind of structure. I mean, there are many gaps and flaws in Indian football. I'm not using it as an example of the greatest thing or the greatest structure that exists, but I'm saying that the absence of playing time and serious seasonal competitions in India is the reason I think our athletes play less sport than, say, the major countries that win all these Olympic medals. Our athletes play far less sport. In hockey, for example, so when you're talking about why are you sending them overseas to train at these events, because you have not, even though you've been a liberalized economy since the mid 90s, you have not set up a competition or a league structure or a regular season for your athletes in this country. So that's why they have to go there. I mean, given the vast geographical diversity of India, given the vast geographical seasonal, you can have year-round competitions and seasons for in many sport. Why do you not do it here? That's where the federation comes in, because like the Sports Authority of India, SAI, can coach and train as many athletes as they want, as can JSW, but they can't organize the events. That's why the federations have to organize the events. The federation have to create these calendars where your athletes can play regularly and where you can bring in the best of talent from overseas. So you don't have to go overseas, to perform. But the role that, I mean, there is no denying that the fact that our athletes are able to go and train, and that is, mind you, it's cost intensive. You're spending more money on sending your athletes overseas as opposed to having some place here where the competition is good enough. You have resources of the country. You're a large country. You speak about whichever trillion economy you want to be. Surely this can become the hub in South Asia for athletes to come from all over the world to come and take part in these events. I mean, look at what hockey has done. Hockey has actually made the biggest hockey tournaments in the world take place in India, but we still don't have a hockey league. So just look at the dichotomy in that sense as well. And the hockey players from all over the world want to come and play in India because they've got great facilities at Odisha and crowds turn up and they enjoy it. So why can you not have that elsewhere? But yes, the big gap that there was in how our sports was run in say the 90s, even as late as the 90s and now is huge. I mean, you cannot even imagine if you tell younger reporters now about what it was like and how they trained, they would just be horrified as to that, as to the fact that that was allowed to happen. And athletes were treated in such a manner.
No, that's interesting. So my takeaway from this is probably CSR money should go more into developing grassroots sports rather than the elite athletes, because there's already significant money being spent. I mean, the taxpayer money that's being spent on them.
Yeah, it's our
For
money.
that.
Exactly. It's our money.
Yeah.
And their money is being spent well. You'd say, okay, if our money is being spent to send our athletes abroad, we'll say, fine, it's great. If our money can also be spent to set up sort of sporting systems and structures in your country, even better. You're just you're increasing the base. Look at the number of shooters that win medals at an international level. Look at the number of
Mm.
badminton players that we send out regularly now, and
Yeah.
that's literally happened. It's like a trickle down effect from Sindhu and Saina Nehwal and Srikanth and all these other guys. So you're absolutely right that the money should go there, but that's not where the headlines are. That's
Mm.
not where the attention is. So
Got it.
that's the issue. That's
Yeah.
not where the
So one very interesting, like you could call it a paradox here, right, is the case of Haryana being able
Mm,
to generate some of the most successful athletes we've had in the recent past. But if you sort of look at this, or if you set this against, let's say, the social context of Haryana, right,
mm,
in terms
mm.
of female literacy, infanticide rates, the
Yes.
sex ratio in Haryana. What explains this paradox, Sharda? Because I think this is something that's intrigued me for a while. How are athletes from Haryana able to get to a stage where they are considered heroes
Mm,
in many ways? But when you actually go to say the villages of Haryana, the representation of women, the social indicators of women don't fare as well. So can you explain this paradox if you have a theory around this?
I mean, theory that I had, it was almost stood on its head after what happened with the wrestlers' protest. They're saying
Hmm.
that literally you were told that this is your status actually, that you have no
Hmm.
power, you have no agency. When you protest against someone in your own organization,
Hmm.
you do not have the right to protest. You do not have any, we will not listen to you.
mm,
And going to one thing to make very clear in this sort of in our conversation, Carl, is to
mm,
understand that Indians take to sport for livelihood. The majority of Indians take to sport for livelihood.
mm,
It's not for leisure. It's not for even physical health and all the other reasons that are there, because that's the school's job. Indians go into competitive sport for livelihood.
mm,
And what happened, the big change, the big period of change for Haryana, particularly
mm,
with response to women and sport, is the 2010 Commonwealth Games that were held in Delhi. And the
mm.
fact that people in Haryana saw these Fogart sisters, Geeta,
Yeah.
Babita, and
Mm,
they saw them and they said, and they saw them winning medals, they saw them being rewarded, they saw them getting, um, to see that visibly, that is actually said to be the big change maker in the approach towards women's sports from
mm,
families, right? From individual families that are there. And you even saw, so the numbers have gone up,
mm.
and there are lovely stories about how in every uh, wrestling competition, Haryana has a culture of wrestling. It has a culture of their own dangals that take place
Yeah.
in the villages. The number of competitions has increased, so that's that whole
Mm,
seasonal calendar that's there. It's not part of
mm.
wrestling federation, but it's there, part of rural Haryana.
Yeah.
The number of girls that wanted to take part there, but there was no one to compete against. So literally, they dress up like boys when they're very young, short hair, shorts, and vest, and they go to and they go and compete, and their
Right.
coaches take them. And that has been the big change, and no one looks at that strangely now anymore. But then, at the other hand, when you're talking about, like I said, about administration and how what is the actual status of the athlete, even the Olympic medal winning athlete in your sport, the wrestling controversy showed us exactly what it
Mm.
was. So we are pretty much in the same place in so many ways, even though there are changes. Using the example of Haryana, there are changes on the ground.
No, this is very interesting, and I just wanted to tell our listeners that out of the Kalo India athletes, the 28 athletes that are part of the contingent, almost 12 of them belong to Haryana. So there's something that's happening right in the grassroots sporting ecosystem there, especially when you look at sports like wrestling, something to sort of like maybe tap into for other states. Just finally, Shada, I just wanted to get a sense of what do you think is the best way to create a sporting culture in India? And you spoke about, and I agree with you that it's a livelihood matter more than leisure, than
Yes.
trying to improve, let's say physical health. So
Mm,
do you think it's in some ways correlated to economic growth, right? Because the likes of Japan, South Korea just took off in terms of their economic growth, and yeah, I think there have been studies which look at correlation between medals and your economic growth. So do you think we need to look at sports as something which is still a long way to go in terms of building that culture? When you first need to ensure that people have food on the table, right?
mm,
Um, so they
yeah.
does bring up the butter versus guns debate, but that's really not the intention here. But how do we generally look at creating a sporting culture?
Now, when you're saying sporting culture, there are sort of two ways to look at it. One is, are you looking at elite sport results? Are you looking at sport on the ground? What's happening on the ground? And my my theory about this is that wherever I go in India, I always try and see what sport is being played where, and you usually find boys playing and not just cricket, right? You go anywhere,
Mm,
and so there is a culture of sport and of leisure and activity, but it's largely focused on boys, and boys have the freedom to go out. So this is also a social sort of a state. Of course, increasing your per capita income is a much more
mm,
in a good way to sort of in my mind is the way to go ahead to look at this elite medal sort of scenario, but again
mm.
becomes chicken and egg. So I'll tell
Yeah.
you the great story which I heard from Aditi Mutarkar, who used to play badminton for India. She's
Right.
involved with a organization called Simply Sport, and they did a study about women's sport across the country. And they went to the two states where it was very women's sport was active, Haryana and Manipur, and then the two states where it was not, Gujarat and Bihar. And the most amazing answer to her came from Manipur. This was way before all the trouble has started. Um,
Mm,
and she was asking someone, what was it that drew you to sport? And that girl just looked at her and she said, I'm sorry, I don't get your question. So then
Okay.
so Aditi had no idea what to say. So she said, but why are you saying that? She said, because my grandmother played sport, my mother played sport.
Okay.
So it's part of my life. It's not getting drawn to it,
Yeah.
So that is a culture of sport that exists in this pocket. There's a culture of sport that exists for women and for men. And there's
Man,
a
yeah.
culture of sport that exists in other parts of the country for women and for men, mostly for men, but in some there might be a women. So what you're looking at is trying to. There are two things there. Elite sport is a completely different game, and I think it's being addressed in a way that it has to be addressed.
Mm.
There's enough investment going into it, but sport on the ground, not for competition, but just in terms of access, people being able to go, run, play. You don't even have to be good at it, just the
Yeah.
chance to go out and be involved from a young age. Like you see
Mm.
kids play, and then everyone after puberty, girls drop off the thing. After 10 standard, 8, whatever, high school, boys drop off.
Mm.
So that is the culture that you're looking to build more than. I think the elite culture is there, it's on its way, it's well rewarded, in that sense. So we get beat up a lot for saying that there is no sports culture in this country, but I think there is, but
Mm.
it's not as widespread as it could be or should be. And my one of my other favorite stories is that
Mm.
I went to in Port Blair. Like I said, I go looking for sports. I went in Port Blair. There were these kids playing football, and they were part of a football club that has a competition. Football again is played everywhere, and
Mm.
they call themselves Nico Madrid, like Real Madrid, and Nico was for Nicobar.
Okay.
So yeah, I
Right.
said, who supports you? So I thought it was some local business. They said XYZ. They gave me a name. I said, do you have his number? I said, yeah. I'll speak to him. I called up this person. I thought he's going to be a local businessman. This
Okay.
was just a government employee in some department who just
Mm.
liked sport. And he
Mm.
said, I thought I should support these boys. It's not a lot of money.
Mm.
And I do it. And it's basically to pay for them to travel, to their kit. That's
Right.
basic stuff. Like
Yeah.
the Brahmaputra Volleyball League that's happening now, that is creating a culture of sport in a way
Mm.
it's part of your annual season.
Yeah.
It's part of your annual life. It's like that Manipur girl says, I don't understand your question because this is my life. It's there. It's part of my year, part of my,
Right.
summer, winter, whatever it is. So that's the culture of sport that I think needs to be appreciated, found, and replicated in many places.
Got it. No, this is like fascinating, and I think when we are recording this on the 30th of July, we have a medal. We have Manu Bakar, who won bronze. So fingers crossed on many more medals for our athletes in the Paris Olympics. With that, Shada, I'd like to thank you for joining me, and hopefully we'll have you soon again. Maybe at the end of the Olympics, maybe we can just take stock of how things have went. But yeah, thank you so much for giving me time. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Carl. This was a great. Enjoyed the conversation. Excuse me for my sort of boomer type lapses of memory where I ran out of numbers and so on. But thanks. It was really interesting. Good
Yeah,
to be talking about all these things and putting them out there for people to hear and pay and notice. And yes, fingers crossed for more medals.
thank you. Thank you so much.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.